Now, Kerrynne Liddle is an Arundel woman who grew up in Alice Springs and is now a Liberal senator for South Australia. She joins me now from Adelaide. Great to talk to you again, Kerrynne. I wonder if first up you can share with us your thoughts on these immediate measures over alcohol and longer-term reports. Is this a good belated response from Canberra and the Northern Territory government?
Well, it's a response, but it's still not enough. It's not listening to the voices of those Aboriginal community-controlled services that told the Minister, that told the Prime Minister back in June last year that they wanted the restrictions that were in place reinstated. These restrictions go some way, but they also fail to recognise that the Australian government has sat around. I've listened to my colleague in the Senate, Jacinta Price, talk about this, plead with this government to do something about it. And when the Prime Minister talks about the Constitution continuously, he has constitutional power to reinstate those restrictions. He has chosen not to. Chris, I want to explain to people who perhaps sleep safely in their beds at night, who don't go about their business, daily business, worrying about whether they are attacked, what one doctor at the hospital told us at the joint parliamentary inquiry in December.
Please
now,
tell us.
I'm going to read this because you can't just make this up. He said that he went over to a morning handover. There were 12 people in the emergency department. Who knows who's already up in the wards? He said that there were, for example, somebody had been hit against the head with a door frame, hit in the head with a rock, beaten with an iron bar, being bitten on the face and required surgical closure, being bitten on the hand, being struck on the arm with a metal pole and having a fractured arm. Now, these are people who are directly involved in a violent incident, not necessarily the people who go about in fear in Alice Springs, tourists, locals, and yes, Aboriginal people themselves. So what I say is, how many people in the more than 6 months that they have known that the removal of those restrictions in that way, without a proper transition plan, was having an effect? How many arms have been broken? How many people have been hit on the head? That's the kind of data that I think is important to expose, and to suggest that this is just a problem that the Northern Territory government has is completely inappropriate. These are constituents, these are Australians.
Yeah, well said, Kerrynne. We've been talking about these problems on this program for years, and particular since July last year, when Jacinta Price and others started to call on the federal government not to allow these alcohol bans to come off. Because, as you say, being a territory, they can intervene. They can't just hand pass this to the territory government. They can intervene, and I suppose Anthony Albanese has belatedly today. But the issue here also is Marion Scringemore. She's the Labor MP up there, an Indigenous woman. She's been calling on her own government to do something here, and they haven't listened to her.
It's perplexing, it's disturbing that they haven't been listening to local people, telling them what the issues are over a long period of time, and just dismissing this as a human rights issue. I ask, what about the human rights of people going about their daily lives without concern about being injured or their cars damaged or rocks thrown at them? All of those things are about just basically going about your business. That is no way to allow any Australian to live. Now, can I also say, Chris, one of the things that disturbs me about this response is that it suggests that reducing the alcohol consumption is the answer. When you've got people in town camps visiting and drinking, you're talking about an issue of overcrowding. You're talking about an issue of the kids not going to school. There are a whole lot of things that need to be addressed in unison. So if the Prime Minister thinks that it's okay to fly in for a few hours and fly out again and not check in regularly on this issue, this is a national crisis. This is the centre of Australia. This was once a major tourism destination, and this requires some very serious attention.
Kerrynne, I'd love our viewers to have more time to get to know you, but you grew up in an Indigenous family in Alice Springs. You're of that area, of the Indigenous people, the Arunta people of that area. Yet your family, yourself and your siblings have all been remarkably successful in that environment. So you must have seen so much trauma, yet your family's been able to be successful regardless of what was around you. Tell us in a nutshell, I know it's a huge question, but what are the key factors?
There is an incredible community in Central Australia, whether it's Aboriginal family, whether it's the township itself, there is incredible pride in that community. And my parents were not going to raise their children anywhere else. There are some real strengths about growing up in a regional centre, and regional people know what they are. I wouldn't have grown up any other way, but I can tell you it was devastating to hear from people that I sat beside in year one at school, right? They're still in Alice Springs now living, who said to me, I can't live here anymore. I have to go, and I do not want my grandchildren growing up in this town. But at the same time, you have to recognise that people who are stuck there, Aboriginal people who are stuck in a vortex of violence and destruction, also don't want to live like that. And they need some really serious support to help them to recover from what has been the trauma of the last 7 months. I heard the Prime Minister, I think it was last week, announcing that he was very happy that graduate teaching students would be offered HECS debt reduction to encourage them to go out and work in Indigenous communities, in remote communities. Well, I say, what is he going to be doing about helping those teachers that are going back next week when there's all of these children from Alice Springs who've been wandering around for quite some time now, getting themselves into trouble, who've been traumatised by a whole lot of things, who knows? I wouldn't want to try and make it up. What sort of supports are going in immediately to support those teachers to actually have those children back in the classroom? This is a really complex issue. It doesn't require talking to public servants. It actually requires talking to the very people that stitch these people up, that look after these people, that understand the communities in which they live and have been working for decades, like the Central Australian Aboriginal Congress in Alice Springs, who were asking for these restrictions, who are devastated by what's happened, and they are still not being listened to because they have still been saying, back as early as December, they want the restrictions reinstated as they were, because the impact on Close the Gap is going to be devastating.
Kerrynne, thanks so much for sharing your perspective. We'll catch up again soon.
Thank you.